Special edition of Tipping Point today as we keep you updated on the developments in Israel since the war began last Saturday, October 7th. I have joining me today from Israel, Brian Schrauger. Brian is a freelance journalist who served for 2 years as the head of the news division for Bridges for Peace and also as the bureau chief for USA Radio Network. His articles have also been published by the Jerusalem Post. Brian, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Well, you are right there in the middle of everything. Kind of give your overview of what's happening. This is Tuesday, October the 10th, right now when we're doing this interview. So tell me what's going on in Israel right now. It's about 5 in the afternoon your time?
It's about actually 6:20.
6:20. So how are things today?
Thankfully, they are quieter than yesterday. I was up in the Golan when everything broke on Saturday and returned to the Jerusalem area on Sunday. And when I arrived home, it was tense, but yesterday, Monday, there were 2 sirens and rocket warnings. There were rockets launched right overhead here. And so the siren goes off. Everyone in the Jerusalem area hears it. You have about 30 seconds, maybe, to find shelter. And then there were these boom, boom. I mean, it just shakes everything. And so there were rockets being fired by Hamas toward Jerusalem. In the first volley, I don't think anything hit. In the second volley, there were rockets there was a rocket that hit just west of Bethlehem. Bethlehem's very close to Jerusalem. And there was another rocket that actually hit a mosque in Abu Ghosh, which is a very popular place for Israelis because in Abu Ghosh there's always been a very warm relationship between Arabs there and Jews. So a lot of Israelis go there to eat. But anyway, at the mosque there, they hit a mosque. So wow. That's what happened yesterday. So anyway, it's been interesting because to actually hear the alarm go off or the siren, you know exactly what's coming. You know there are rockets on the way. Most people in Jerusalem are hurriedly moving to a safe room, which is for every resident in Israel is required to have this, a bomb-proof shelter. And most people now have them in their homes. They have a room that's specially reinforced where they shut the door. And they hide out there. They're supposed to stay there for like 10 minutes.
Wow.
Oh, and then all day yesterday and today, we've heard jets flying over. So the F-35s, F-15s that Israel has in its Air Force fleet have obviously been making bombing runs over to Gaza, and we hear them flying over. It's a very small place. As the crow flies from Jerusalem, it's maybe 80 kilometers to Gaza, so that's what 50 miles. It's pretty close.
So in this invasion that took place on Saturday of all 1,000 terrorists that broke through the fence and the wall and came into Israel, there was the pretense of that from the Palestinians that they were trying to prevent the demolition of Al-Aqsa, I guess the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And from an American perspective, from our perspective, and I think this is a lot of the world's perspective, that it was about Saudi Arabia and Iran. What do you believe and what's being said in Israel about the impetus for all this?
Well, Hamas has always been very, very motivated by its religious beliefs, by Islam. And it frames everything in terms of defeating Israel in religious terms, in terms of getting the Jews out of the land because they don't belong there. And so all of this is to honor Allah. One thing I think a lot of Americans don't realize is when they hear Allahu Akbar, they tend to think, because mainstream media will say this means God is great, but it doesn't mean that. What Allahu Akbar means, and you hear this over and over and over again, it means Allah is greater.
Oh.
Yes?
Yeah.
So if Allah is greater, then it's a proclamation that our God is greater than your God or any other God. And so we hear this here, depending on where you live, and I happen to live near several mosques, so I hear this 4 or 5 times a day, beginning at about 4:30 in the morning, the Allahu Akbar chant. The Islamic call to prayer is broadcast from muezzins, which are the tall towers that stick up from mosques wherever Islam is located in the Middle East. And here in the Middle East, in Israel, they broadcast in the open air. So you're getting Allahu Akbar and the Islamic prayers basically forced on you 5 times a day, beginning at about an hour before sunrise. So right now that's like 4:30, 5 o'clock here.
Oh yeah, every time we've been in Israel, you hear that constantly through the day, and they want you to hear it, of course.
Of course they do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. What is the feeling in Israel right now related to the danger level? Obviously, you know, they're lobbing missiles from Gaza towards you guys where they were yesterday. It seems as though they're being decimated in Gaza by the IDF right now. But Hezbollah, you were saying that when you were driving back from the Golan, all the reservists were headed up toward the northern border and the Lebanon, Syrian border. What is the feeling in Israel right now regarding the safety level and specifically Hezbollah and the threat represented there?
Everybody here is very concerned. I mean, this just exploded overnight. Nobody saw this coming, and I think you can argue that most Israelis have some level of PTSD,
right?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, because of things they've experienced in many wars. Family members have been in battles. Everybody knows somebody who's been killed or injured by a terrorist attack. So this has a very visceral impact on Israelis. It's very common right now to hear, for example, that I can't work, I can't think, I keep going back to the news. And I am feeling this myself. I try to do something and I find myself, no, I've got to go check the news. I've got to go look at Twitter. I've got to see what's happening.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the big risks is that Hezbollah might jump in. In fact, just maybe 30 minutes ago, a report came out that the IDF right now is responding to mortar fire, mortar fire that was aimed at the Western Galilee maybe an hour or so ago as we speak. So Hezbollah has clearly been, it's kind of acted like a mosquito. You know, it's poking up there to see what the response is. You know, will it be slapped down or not? And the whole strategy of what happened here with this attack feels very much like a test run for what everybody expects will eventually come from Hezbollah in Lebanon, which will be a massive launch of rockets. They have far more rockets and far more sophisticated missiles than they do in Gaza. And Iron Dome, David's Sling, all of these things, they won't be able to stop every rocket. It just won't be possible.
Right.
That's one reason for this large barrage to come through, because some will hit. And so there was, I think, an attempt in part to see how Israel would respond and how well this strategy would work for Hezbollah at some point, sooner or later, to do kind of the same thing, but on a bigger scale.
Wow. Well, you know, Psalm 83 talks about a war where it's a regional war where all of Israel's enemies come all at once. And they are miraculously, they overcome those enemies. And this could be leading up to that. Let's talk about Iran for just a minute now. Iran, there are still daily raids by Israel up in Syria regarding Iran. Iran is trying to bring they have arms in Syria and they have armaments on the northern border there. Is there any sense of a threat there from Israel, from the IDF?
Well, Lebanon and Syria are right next to each other on Israel's northern border. So, yes, there's no doubt that Iran has been making Syria its place to develop and store weapons that it wants to supply to Hezbollah, including the manufacturing of them. And so there are huge ammo dumps. And although none of this is stated publicly for security reasons here, it's safe to guess that Israel has been regularly bombing these munition dumps and production facilities where bombs and other things are being produced to attack, and maybe chemical weapons. And there have even been reports of the development of drugs, which are used largely, I think, to sell to raise money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Israel's been fighting Iran, for a couple of years. It's been a so-called silent war, and has made regular bombing runs. And I really don't know to the degree that that's continued since the attack began on Saturday morning. Right now, Israel is focused pretty much entirely, I think, on of course, it has to deal with Hamas and Gaza, and then, but it can't just be there. It has to also have its attention up north.
Right.
One threat from this was that if Israel had all of its attention focused down south, then Hezbollah could slip in and come attack from, and there would be this pincer movement. So that's why when I drove back from the Golan on Sunday, we saw hundreds and hundreds of automobiles in makeshift parking lots, which are cars that are owned by Israelis who've been called up from reserves to serve in the IDF. And clearly, there are a significant number of those troops that are up north, as well as, of course, going down south to Gaza.
Well, leading up to this, Israel has been in crisis for the last year or so regarding the judicial reform specifically, and other issues. But the judicial reform has caused the riots and just the polarizing of politics there in Israel. How much of that do you think led up to Israel being distracted from Hamas and their enemies?
Well, clearly what happened began on Saturday, is something that was in the works for a long time, perhaps as much as a year. If in fact it began a year ago, that was before the Netanyahu government came into power, the new coalition. However, clearly the division here in Israel has been so visceral and so sustained that foreign press, especially when you look at publications, foreign press in Iran, they have gloated over Israel's imminent demise, thinking, okay, it's finally falling apart. And so there has been a perception of weakness. And it's very, very likely that this was seen by the people behind this operation as an opportune time to launch an attack.
And so with Israel's vulnerable right now. And it seems as though largely the West has supported Israel's right to defend herself, not given any sympathy to Hamas and to Hezbollah and to Iran. However, there are celebrations going on around the world right now, and there are nations that are supportive of the Palestinians. Now, the deal with the Saudis was warming up, getting to a seeming conclusion of normalization between relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would be huge. I mean, it's huge for the economy of Israel. It's huge for the security of Israel, all of those things. And so the perception is Iran orchestrated this to disrupt that process. At least that was part of the reason for it. And I saw yesterday where Saudi Arabia has condemned Israel. Saudi Arabia basically has blamed Israel for the attack, saying if you weren't occupiers and oppressors, this wouldn't have happened to you. So what's going on with Saudi Arabia?
Well, my read of the situation is that King Salman, who's very old right now, he's clearly been a strong supporter of the Palestinians, but for several years he's been handing power over to MBS, Mohammed bin Salman.
Right.
And Mohammed bin Salman is a reformer. He's bringing all sorts of changes into Saudi Arabia. So I think the driving force behind this move toward normalization with Israel is coming from MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. But he has to honor his father and also that sentiment in Saudi Arabia, which is pro-Palestinian. So everything here has to be filtered through these kinds of political realities, right? And that's one reason sometimes you'll hear Israel, in fact, will hear very, very harsh rhetoric and then interpret it, okay, they have to say this for other reasons. And the reality of what we hear in public and what actually happens behind the scenes are often very different things.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is that for the first time ever, Hamas has employed a tactic where for some time they've deliberately led Israel to believe that they were becoming an entity that Israel could tolerate. We don't want to fight. We want our people to have jobs. We want to have the borders open. And for its part, Israel has not wanted to go in and run Gaza. They just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so, as with Fatah in the West Bank or Judea, Samaria, the Palestinian territories, there is an uneasy peace because Israel wants somebody to run it other than Israel. So, what Hamas did this time, it's this deception, is so and when you combined also with tactics like the tactic of air gliders coming in. We had terrorists coming in on air gliders, and that's how one way they got into Israel proper and began killing people in their homes and in the fields here. All of this looks like something that has been orchestrated by the outside. It's such a sophisticated strategy that, of course, most believe that Iran is the guiding hand in all of this. By the way, I should also say that most people may not know this, but Iran has been funding Hamas and its sibling terror organizations to the tune of at least $100 million a year for several years.
Wow. Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, he has a very fragile coalition. Is there support for him today as Prime Minister?
Yes, and that's one thing that's very, very encouraging and interesting here in Israel. The division here has been severe. The opposition and then the coalition government, all at once, Israel has come together. Nobody is saying we won't fight, and it's almost certain that there will be a so-called emergency coalition government, which means Lapid and the former prime minister and Benny Gantz, who also probably could become prime minister, they are willing to join the Netanyahu government, and Avigdor Lieberman is as well. And in order to have a united and coordinated strategy acting as one during the time of war. And this is a war that could last a while.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being with me today. Now, we'll be talking in the days to come about what's happening over there, but we really do appreciate your insight, Brian. It's very, very helpful and very thoughtful. So thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jimmy. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
God bless.
God bless you. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Tipping Point. We'll see you again soon.
you.